This is the first video for the last part of Chapter 4, where I'm going to be going over the final method of solving quadratic equations, which is the quadratic formula. This video is going to be pretty short. It's just going to be me introducing how the formula looks like and what it can be used for, and then in the next video for this, I'll go over how to actually use it to solve things. So, going straight into things. What is the quadratic formula? It's a pretty ugly looking and complicated seeming formula that is going to let you solve quadratic equations without really having to put a whole lot of thought into them. So of the methods that I've covered so far, graphing, factoring, completing the square, they all kind of have their niches. There are times when they're good. Graphing is great if you already have a graph, or maybe if you're using graphing software. Factoring is really helpful when you can factor, when it's something you can look at and without a whole lot of trouble get it into a factored form, because the solving there is pretty easy. Completing the square is typically really good when it's already in vertex form. I wouldn't myself personally go through the process of completing the square just to get it into vertex form so I could solve it. But if you've already got something in vertex form, then sure, you might as well solve it that way. The quadratic formula is kind of the catch-all. If it's not something you want to do with any of the other ones because it doesn't seem factorable or the numbers don't seem very nice, the quadratic formula is our go-to. So it's for standard form. So for ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and it has to be equal to 0. This is the formula. So it's x equals, because we're solving for x, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So that's it. You're going to have to memorize this. It's something you're going to use a fair bit in Pre-Calc 11 and Pre-Calc 12 and beyond. So it's something you definitely need to internalize. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Some really common places for people to mess up would be, not surprisingly, this negative out front, the plus or minus, the square on the b, the minus in the root, and then maybe the 4 also in there. All of those things are things that people tend to mess up, and just negatives in general, not shockingly. So to use this formula, we're just going to plug numbers into it, right? You're going to get a, b, and c from your standard form equation. You're just going to pop them in, simplify, and calculate. So for this video, I'm not going to focus on the solving side of things. I'm just going to focus on how we can use this to figure out how many solutions we have. So the part of the formula that's inside the root, so that b squared minus 4ac bit, actually has a name. It's called the discriminant. So the discriminant. And it is what decides how many solutions we have. So this is really, honestly, one of the most efficient ways of looking at something and deciding how many solutions it's going to have before you even solve it. If it's already in vertex form, it's pretty easy to just think out of where the vertex is and what direction you're going, so that's probably the fastest, but then this is probably your next best option. And so we can break it down into 3 categories. Keep in mind, we're doing a root here, so the whole reason this decides the number of solutions is because of the root. So if we're doing b squared minus 4ac, and we get a positive number, something bigger than 0. That's going to give us 2 solutions because, say, for example, you ended up with 100. And then you did the square root of 100 and you'd get 10. And so in this formula, you'd be doing plus or minus that 10. So we get 2. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then you're going to get 1 solution, because you do the square root of 0, you get 0, and so whether you're adding or subtracting that, it's not going to make much of a difference. And so you could probably figure out from looking at this that if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, so if it's negative, that's when we're going to get no solutions, because we can't do square roots of negatives. So these are the things you need to keep in mind. Basically, look at your b squared minus 4ac and think about, all right, well, how many solutions am I going to get here? So let's try this out. So how many solutions do these things have? So let's try a few. For example, 3x squared plus 7x minus 1. And that's going to be equal to 0. So we don't have to do the whole formula. If we're just checking for the solutions, we can just do b squared minus 4ac. So remember, a is 3, b is 7, c is negative 1. We're going to be really, really careful with our negatives here. So if we plug this in, b squared is going to be 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, and times c, which is negative 1. And you really, really want to watch out for that negative at the end there. So if we go through and do this, that's going to be 7 squared, which is 49. And so there's two different approaches you can take as you're calculating the second half of this. So you can do minus and then 4 times 3 times negative 1, which is going to be negative 12. And then you can turn that into 49 plus 12, which is going to get you 61. What I would personally do, I usually try to think of this as being basically a negative 4. And so when I'm going through and I'm doing this, it's negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12, times negative 1, which is positive 12, which would just take you straight down to there. Whatever is most comfortable for you so that you don't mess up the negatives, just try to go with that. Either way, we ended up with 61. 61 is bigger than 0, which means we have two solutions. So let's try another one. So if we look at 2x squared plus 6x plus 20 equals 0. And so we just do the same thing. So b squared minus 4ac is going to give us 6 squared minus 4 times 2 times 20. 6 squared is 36. 4 times 2 times 20, keeping in mind again that that's a minus, is going to be 160. And so when you subtract that, it's going to be negative 124. And that is less than 0, so we have no solutions. Right, and then this is really all you need to do. So I'll throw a few more up here for you. Just make sure you're being careful with your negatives, and once you've got that down, you should be good to go. So try these two out and see what you get. All right, so give those two a try and see what you come up with. Okay, so looking at this first one here, it's got a lot of negatives, so we do have to be really careful here. So our b squared minus 4ac, so b is negative 10. That's what we're going to square. And then minus 4 times a, which is negative 3, times c, which is negative 17. So a common thing that people will mess up here is they won't put brackets on this, especially if they're using a calculator. So keep in mind you're doing negative 10 times negative 10. So anytime you square a negative, you should get a positive. So you really got to watch out for that. If you mess that up, you're probably ruining the rest of the question. So looking at what else we've got here, we're doing minus 4 times negative 3 times negative 17. It's a lot of negatives. So for me, again, I'm going to just treat this as if I'm basically multiplying 3 negative numbers, which is going to get me a negative. And so now I don't even really have to think about them. I just got to do the multiplication. So 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 17, if I calculate that real quick, is going to be 204. And so if I subtract those, I get negative 104. And again, that's negative, so we have no solutions. So you really got to watch the negatives here. All right, for our last one here, you hopefully noticed that we had a 5 over here on the right. So remember, it has to be equal to 0. So our first step before we can even solve this one is we've got to move that 5 over to the left, which is going to get me 4x squared minus 6x minus 15 equals 0. And then now we're going to do our b squared minus 4ac stuff. So b squared minus 4ac equals negative 6 squared, again watching out for that negative, minus 4 times 4 times negative 15. So negative 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times positive 4 times negative 15 is going to be positive 240. And so we add those together, we get 276, which is a positive number, which means, once again, we have two solutions. So there we are. That is how you check the number of solutions with the quadratic formula. Once you're ready to start actually solving things, go ahead and move on to the next video and see how we can use this to get some answers.